Okay, well, why don't I, love the background, got it, so why don't we get the deck up now? It's kind of 4 minutes past. We'll see.
Great.
We've got a lot of attendees in anyway, so thank you everyone who's kind of been waiting. So
Where's IT support when you need it?
absolutely. Well, hopefully this is just about to seamlessly click on. Right, can you see that, Steve? Is my screen sharing now with your good self?
I can see your screen, but I can't see the presentation yet. All I can see is your Sony TV built-in Retina display sort of windows.
Okay.
So I don't know whether you've selected the correct window. Ah, there it is.
There we go, technology.
Yeah. No embarrassing tabs open at the top there either.
No, absolutely not. No, we learned from that Leicester football, didn't we? So we've covered that one off. Fantastic. Well, it's about 5 past, so thank you very much, everyone, for sort of holding fire with us. We just wanted to try and get as many participants in and into the system before we went live. So this is mine and Steve's first ever joint seminar together. So through the joys of technology, we are both in our houses a few miles apart in Manchester. As I'm sure you're all sort of hiding away from kids and dogs and pets and all sorts of things at home. We're going to be, the webinar's planned to run for about an hour. We'll try and talk for maybe sort of 45 minutes and leave time at the end for a Q&A, roughly. We did a run through yesterday and checked the technology and being our first webinar and sort of tried to get ourselves au fait with everything. So hopefully everything runs fine. If you have any issues with sort of things dropping out, you can try refreshing it, or you can log back out and log back in again. You won't be locked out if you need to kind of restart Zoom and things. That's not a problem. Sorry, let me just go there. So house rules, I kind of jumped into that already. We've deliberately set everyone up at the minute so your mics are muted, because we've got sort of close to 100 participants on here, and if everyone who's coughing, sniffing, telling the kids to be quiet, etc., in the background, we couldn't be able to hear ourselves think. It also means it's slightly eerie for Steve and I when we're presenting, that we kind of don't quite know if everyone can sort of hear things. If there are any issues, please put it into the chat, and that's being monitored by Hayley from Smoking Gun, my ops director, just to check things. So obviously I'm sharing my screen, I can't see, look into the chat at the moment. But also put questions as we go through, put any questions into the chat, and Steve and I will run through them at the end. We are recording this session, so we will be able to share a version of this afterwards as well. I'm assuming the technology all works okay. And we will share it with everyone who's joined and everyone else who's registered interest but hasn't managed to make it on this morning due to kind of whatever. There aren't really too many other rules, to be honest. It's a session to try and just share a bit of insight, knowledge, opinion, and sort of help everyone. Obviously, if you've got a question to ask, probably 10 other people on the webinar probably thinking the same thing, so don't be shy of asking questions at the end. I think it's a non-selling webinar, but we'll just let Steve introduce himself and tell you a little bit about who he is for those that don't know him.
Good morning, everybody. I am Steve McCarron, and I work with Planning Express. I've been with Planning Express since around September, October of last year. For those of you who don't know Planning Express, we are a strategic brand and comms consultancy. We solve problems for clients, brand problems, new product development problems, comms problems, and work to develop strategic ideas and creative ideas with clients. We work out best inputs for all of that in terms of research inputs and other sorts of stimulus, and we also take on qualitative and quant research for our clients. in order to build that into the process. So that's what we do. That's enough about me.
Fantastic. And for those that don't know me, I'm Rick Guttridge. I'm the co-owner and managing director at Smoking Gun. We're a PR and social media agency, so really helping brands to drive and build irresistible momentum through helping them tell a great narrative about themselves. And we really believe the name Smoking Gun comes from a Sherlock Holmes novel. It's about the irrefutable proof. And we believe that, that the impact of PR and reputation can be measured. And it's kind of made it our goal to kind of prove that. We've had a long-standing partnership with Planning Express right back to the early days when Liz first co-founded it. And really pleased that we've been able to sort of join forces today. And this came about because Steve and I are part of another sort of agency leaders group, and we were a few agency leaders were chatting a couple of weeks ago, sharing some of the general business tips for surviving through COVID, because we all know it's a tough time out there, and actually the liquidity of businesses and keeping cash in the business and how to deal with staff and for all those other issues are absolutely huge for people at the minute. But then we started to have a separate discussion about, well, what does this mean from a Marcom's perspective, and how can we help advise clients and then other partner agencies in terms of the best practice to kind of come through this, and looking at a whole mixture of, hopefully what we've got today is a nice strategic framework which Steve has developed and we'll talk through, and then we'll also be sharing practical examples of other brands and businesses that are doing the right and wrong things so far, and be also giving you food for thought, both in the sort of short term and the long term in terms of how to get through this. So without any further ado, we shall sort of kick off. And I think it's kind of an interesting place to kind of start here in terms of, we're hearing from a lot of brands, you know, clients and otherwise, just other people we're chatting to and looking at social, etc. And people are a bit worried. They're worried, should we be communicating at the minute? Should we be doing marketing? How do we talk to people? How do we talk to staff? How do we talk to external audiences and things? Because, you know, there's a crisis, people are dying, you know, there's a lot of seriousness out there. So, you know, people are worried about being damned if they do, damned if they don't. So there's a few different bits of research that we'd seen lately. And I think this piece from Censuswide, who are sort of one of the bigger national opinion survey companies, nearly half of people have said that they're going to trust a brand less if there's no communication during a crisis. And I guess it's common sense really, but it's a bit like if you're having an individual brand crisis, we would never ever advise to a client to say no comment about something, because that lack of voice, that lack of communication immediately signifies some kind of guilt in the audience's mind. And I think brands going quiet now and not communicating is an absolute faux pas, and we'll be touching again this later on when Steve talks about the impacts and recovery later, so kind of bear that in mind. And I think the chart at the bottom is actually by Opinion, another research agency, and they've looked at what kind of brands do consumers want to hear more and less from by category. So I know on the call we've got a whole mixture of different brand side category people on there, so I won't run through them all. As I say, this will all be shared afterwards so you can kind of see it, but clearly people are wanting to know a lot about health and well-being, food, drinks, all those kind of essential sort of goods at the moment that you can imagine in a time of sort of a health pandemic. You know, and interestingly, at the bottom, I thought the gym and fitness category was one that, you know, over a third wanted to hear less from. But then we've just been joking about the whole Joe Wicks scenario, and the amount of people who are looking at exercising and ways to keep fit at home. It's quite an interesting angle to that as well. But Steve will be touching again on that later on.
Right.
So if this. There we go. So Steve's outlined his 4-step approach now to helping get going.
Thank you, Rick. Now, me and Rick's controlling the progression of the slides, so me and Rick have developed a cunning signalling plan whereby I pat myself on the head in order to tell him to move on to the next chart. So if you can see me, it's not that I'm congratulating myself after each chart, it's simply that signal. If Rick snoozes off whilst I'm presenting, I might have to vocalize the requirement to change the chart. But we'll see how that goes. So in the interest of keeping things simple, we boil this down into a simple 4-step approach. And it's kind of sequential because the first 2 steps are making sense of and dealing with the here and now. So this is what you might call the tactical response to making the best of what is an extraordinary situation, which is adapt and smart comms. And then the next 2 are about lifting the head up really and looking forward in order to anticipate what is coming, and so being more strategic about how we create success. So the first phase is about adapting to those extraordinary circumstances, the shutdown economy, and how we need to adjust, or how business and brands need to adjust product, the delivery of the product, and operations in order to survive and hopefully thrive. The second is about getting the comms right during this phase. They are the most reactive phases because they're about responding to an extraneous new circumstance. The next two phases are about being much more strategic. Firstly, starting to lift the head up and prepare and respond proactively for what might be a different world order after lockdown. And that's about adjusting and recalibrating brand strategy. It's likely that markets, the consumer, the competitor context are all likely to evolve and change following lockdown. So we need to understand that and evolve brand strategy. And then finally, the consensus amongst most of the world's economists is that we will enter into a severe recession at the other side of lockdown. So there are things that we can do in order to prepare for this strategically, in order to make the best of it. Okay, and given that history shows us that most business leaders and chief financial officers don't necessarily understand the value of marketing in a recession, it's important for us as marketers to review this and to have a point of view and start to build that narrative in the organization now. So the first part of reacting to the here and now is adapting to the requirements of the shutdown economy. Now, for the businesses that have had to stop trading, the focus is entirely on cost reduction, managing cash flow so that business can survive and then rebound post-lockdown. However, for other businesses where core products and services are better suited to the requirements of the shut-at-home economy and are still trading, this phase is about adapting the product and its delivery in order to reorientate and be relevant in the stay-at-home economy. And for many, core products and services have been adapted. And for others, it's about changing the delivery mechanisms in order to cope with often an increased demand where workforces are adapted. So you could say that this phase is about embracing fast-track innovation. Normally, innovation happens over slower timescales. It's proactive. It's about anticipating what's coming around the corner. This is very much reactive. It's about coping with something that's unanticipated and has hit us hard. And we can take inspiration from the Nightingale hospitals, where amazing feats of vision and execution have been achieved over incredibly short timescales in terms of what has been achieved there. And similar sorts of efforts are required by businesses and their marketing departments. And it's a real opportunity for marketeers to really show their worth, because traditionally marketing has driven new product innovation, because marketing understands best the market, consumer attitudes, and the voice of the marketing department can really help the business guide decision-making during this pressurized moment in time. So the following charts, Rick will talk through a number of great examples where brands have stepped up to this emergency MPD spirit and adapted and reacted. So I'll hand over to you, Rick.
Cheers, Steve. So I think the first one at the bottom here, so this is covered in the Times, and this is the link up between Morrison's as the supermarket and Deliveroo. So clearly Deliveroo has a fantastic high-tech business able to, with scale, that's able to get food out to people, but all of a sudden their supply chain was throttled. Lots of restaurants either closed the doors fully, the majority closed the doors fully, and only a limited number were sort of doing takeaways, whereas Morrison's had the supply of goods, but obviously with lockdown and people going shopping less, and they didn't have their D2C business set up, they had the perfect yin and yang, and they came together and very quickly innovated and created an app to link up all the sort of local store side of things with Morrison's with Deliveroo to enable home delivery. And delivery is promised within 30 minutes of ordering, which was a fantastic breakthrough for the people who were stuck in, being number 362,000 in the queue for Ocado delivery slots, and all this kind of noise you heard on social media about people who couldn't get the home shopping delivered. So I thought that was a fantastic tie-up of how two different companies came together quickly with complementary needs. And I think we've seen a lot of that, examples of people with sort of complementary skills and services coming together to solve the needs rather of the target audience. And then the top one is actually a client of Smoking Guns, Piccolo Foods. It's a baby food brand. And I just wanted to show this one as well, because it's an example that you don't have to be a giant to be able to innovate and do something quickly. So there's a lot of media coverage and noise on social media about parents with young children not being able to get hold of baby formula and weaning food. People with stockpiles, one of the items that's been stockpiled beyond toilet rolls and pasta. And this client's entire distribution chain was out through the grocery channels, and the grocery channels were struggling to get it onto shelf, even though these guys were supplying it. So they quickly, within a week, again innovated and did a sort of D2C e-commerce launch, and we're doing it in a supply chain of a sort of buying a box worth a month. So you're kind of bulk buying to make it work well for them from the logistics point of view, but also from a family kind of knowing you've got the baby or your young child covered for a month's worth of food. And also built into their DNA is actually doing social good. So this brand's only about 6 years old, and they've got a history of doing a lot of food donation with food banks, and they cooked that into this new supply chain as well. So for every month's worth of supply someone ordered, they're donating 5 baby meals out to national food banks. So again, it's quickly turned around. And then we've pulled out Zoom here, which we're all obviously using today, and really it's the kind of step change in Zoom as a sort of application, because perhaps it's maybe seen as very much a sort of B2B conferencing tool used by lots of sort of global and national sales teams, etc. And sort of Steve termed it here that the pandemic's new social media, and the amount of people who are doing sort of Zoom chats with family, loved ones, virtual pub quizzes. I know my kids are sort of jumping in and doing all class Zooms, which 31 kids shouting at each other is absolute bedlam, but they seem to love it for half an hour. I don't think any of them can hear a word they're saying, but it's just that being able to connect and feel like a little bit of normality. And I think Zoom scored some really good plus points by giving unlimited access for schools to use it. So not only reaching a high number of users, but also winning hearts and minds. And the figures there are just mind-blowing, gone from 10 to 200 million subscribers. So I think if most of us think about scaling our businesses, actually doing those kind of increases in what sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks time just is absolutely mind-blowing. And it's one of the platforms that seems to have held up and worked. It says touching wood so that we don't fall over during this webinar, but it's doing really well. And I think they've also jumped. There has been some issues. There has been some stories in the media about people hijacking webinars and chats and things like that, but they've kind of tried to jump on that fairly quickly. Hired ex-security chief from Facebook, but they've also stopped sharing data with mobile users to Facebook as well, because they got criticised for that. So they've kind of listened to their audience and adapted. So they've done well. And then I think the Richer Sounds one is another interesting one. We've been talking about the death of the high street for 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. What this is going to do, this pandemic, is surely just going to accelerate even more the death knell of lots of kind of retailers, sadly, and making people having to pivot and change. What we liked about this was Richer Sounds are really known for the quality of advice that their store staff give you. So if you're in the market, a Richer Sounds customer isn't just looking for the cheapest, 50-inch TV they can get. They wanted some quality home entertainment. They want to know, they want to find what's right for them, and they want some guidance through that. And what we liked about this was, rather than just kind of furloughing all their sales staff and just having an e-commerce function still there, because this is one of the sectors that is booming. Home delivery on home electronics is absolutely phenomenal. And I know I went to the local tip just before we went to the lockdown, and people were queuing out of the onto the road, and it was basically everyone was taking all their cardboard boxes from their massive new TVs that people were buying, or chest freezers and things like that. And what Richer Sound have done with their sales team is make them all available via phone, because they want to keep that quality of advice and that personal sort of guiding people through finding out what their home setup is and what they kind of actually want to achieve at home, so that they're still getting the fantastic service that Richer Sounds is renowned for. And then another one that's been a bit of a media darling, they've had a lot of really positive press for some of their actions, is the fast food chain Leon. So again, lots of restaurants started to turn to delivery only initially, just to try and maintain sales. What these guys actually did was to do a full pivot and actually turn all of their store chain into supermarkets. With ready-made meals that could be heated, stored, frozen, and things at home. So it sort of became synonymous with going to get a quick ready meal that's ready for you to take home, and that the whole supply chain, the preparation, everything really changed from what they were doing before. But again, it's been a really big success for them. So now I'll pass back on to Steve to go into section 2.
Thanks, Rick. So that's the first phase, really, the requirement to adapt the product and service, adapt delivery mechanisms in rapid timescales, adopt this emergency MPD mindset, and really marketing, I think, is critical during that period in helping make decisions, and some great examples of businesses that have risen to that challenge. The next phase is still within the tactical response to the extraordinary requirements of the shutdown economy, but it's more about communications and how to communicate around that. And we think actually it's helpful to think quite simply of different sorts of brands which are in different sorts of situations. You've got brands who are absolutely flying in terms of demand because their product and service suits the requirements of the stay-at-home economy, and they're actually struggling to meet demand. Whereas other brands have had to go into stasis. They've had to stop trading because the shutdown means that they consumers simply can't use them at the moment, or if businesses are depleting their staff, they can't provide a service. Now, we would argue that comms are important right now for both of those groups, even for those who are in stasis, but we'll come back to those shortly. First, we'll take a look at those who are flying. And for those brands, comms is less about demand generation. Demand is pretty much looking after itself, but it's more about behaving responsibly. And that's because people recognize that businesses and brands need to keep trading and need to keep making money where they can. Nobody wants the economy to completely seize up. However, at the same time, nobody wants to see brands behaving opportunistically and exploiting a situation which is falling into their laps. Therefore, marketing has a role to play in showing that the brand is playing a constructive role at the same time as making money. And that's often done through showing how the brand or business is investing back into the economy and not just reaping the profits of being well fit to thrive in the stay-at-home economy. So in the next few charts, Rick will show some examples of brands that are well suited to the shutdown economy, but aren't simply reaping the benefits, but are embracing communication in order to legitimize the profits that they're making, I guess. So Rick, over to you.
Cheers, Steve. And I think we're starting off with two of the behemoths of of our modern economic world, so Apple and Google. So you could argue, do you know what, they've got they literally have a responsibility with the profits that they make to do something. But good on them, they're actually putting aside their kind of war of platforms and coming together here to try and develop this mobile app technology to help trace and track the spread of coronavirus. And so if you can get this right, obviously the numbers of sort of smartphone ownership in the first world is just phenomenal and sort of pretty much saturated. So if they can get this right and be able to track down and sort of really show someone where they've been in close contact with someone who's later been confirmed to have contracted coronavirus, this could be a game changer in terms of future controlling the spread of the virus and helping us all get back to some kind of new normality in the future. And I think also Apple have been great in terms of giving free books for children. I think, as a father of 4, I feel this pain, and I know a lot of people on this call are also parents. So keeping the kids entertained and this idea of homeschooling, is whilst working, it's just a nightmare. So I think brands that are doing little bits to kind of make their facilities free in terms of entertaining them can only be a good thing. I think BrewDog have, again, been a bit of a consumer darling over the last 10 years in terms of their attitude to doing things differently. And they've turned their production facilities, turned off some of the producing alcohol, because clearly their pubs are closed, and turn that into making hand sanitizer. And they're not the only ones. I've seen a lot of gin distilleries, and there's certainly a Manchester gin distillery doing this as well. So I think it's great where we can see people who can keep the workforce earning and working, but actually, rather than producing what they were doing before, turn this into something that's actually helping the economy. And another one for Google, this teach from home. So they've made this as a temporary sort of hub of information for teachers, to give them a lot more tools and resources for these teachers who are still trying to teach their pupils remotely and from home, and make a lot more things accessible and free and online. So again, it's only to kind of be applauded in terms of helping keep that effort going. And then Peloton, so those that are into the cycling will know this app. And I think this is just an example of people giving sort of either above and beyond to their regular subscribers, or just helping to get new people in. So they're giving 3 months use of the Bike Fitness app, absolutely free, which I'm sure they'll be hoping to retain some of those customers afterwards. But doing it for 3 months just feels like a good, genuine offer kind of upfront. And similarly with Adidas across their running app. So 3 months, again, free use on there. So big brands kind of stepping up and just helping to, where everyone's sort of worried about fitness and keeping their mental health in a good place through fitness as well. I think it's a good sort of socially responsible thing for fitness brands to be doing. And then we were discussing Disney Plus, and I'm one of the many families who've subscribed to this as another tool in the armory to stop the kids fighting. £60 for an annual subscription, it was a no-brainer. But they brought forward the launch of Disney Plus early by a few months, because they saw the sort of latent demand that was going to be there. But we were just debating, was this a missed opportunity to win hearts and minds really from such a big loved brand? Sure, they've smashed their sales targets and they're ahead of plans for their first year subscriptions already, thanks to the situation we're in. And I've not really seen any media or social media backlash on them doing this, but we did just kind of feel like, could they have done more than just a 7-day free trial that would have been their planned move anyway? Would it have really hurt them to have given everyone a month free to kind of help people out in this time? So it's just a question that we posed. And then I think, looking at the social media and tech giants, they get bashed a lot in the media for not doing enough to clamp down on the spreading of fake news. So there's been a lot of talk in the last week or so around the sort of spread of the fake news around 5G, being, in fact, the new 5G masts being a cause of coronavirus, and could the likes of Facebook, etc., have done more to have clamped down on that? But I think this shows the other side of it, and I think no one can turn the nose but philanthropy at the level of $1 billion. So sure, the guy's got a lot of money in his back pocket, but that's a hell of a lot to give to really help in the fight against finding a cure and things moving forward. So hats off to Jack Dorsey there. So there's a whistle-stop tour there of some of the brands who are behaving responsibility. So back to Steve now for the next phase.
So still on communications. So you can see that brands that are flying, where they're well suited to the shutdown economy, are using communication smartly in order to demonstrate that they're also giving back and behaving in a constructive way and being helpful within society. We would also argue that brands that aren't flying, whose businesses are less well suited to the stay-at-home economy, still have a requirement for smart marketing and smart communications. And that's because they need to maintain visibility, especially during a period where increasingly they become invisible. So why is maintaining visibility important? Well, it's been well documented that successful brands are built on having strong mental and physical availability. And most notably, this has been documented in the work of Byron Sharp and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And I'm sure a lot of you have come across Byron Sharp's work in How Brands Grow. And there they talk about physical availability and mental availability being the bedrock of brands. Physical availability, quite simply, is about distribution, really. It's about being able to buy the product and access the product when you need it. And mental availability is the space that a brand occupies in people's minds. If a brand comes to mind at the moment of need, people are more likely to buy it. So having both of those, mental and physical availability, are important. However, if you think about mental availability, it's built through being exposed to a brand, and you get exposed to a brand through usage of a brand, seeing it whilst you're out and about, bumping into it, driving past it, such as restaurants and retail outlets or cars on the road, and using it. And then finally through comms. But for brands that can't trade in the shutdown economy, such as airlines and restaurants, we're not using them, we're not bumping into them. And so they're becoming pretty invisible. And it's only through comms that those brands can maintain visibility, only through comms and smart marketing. So this is a problem because past experience from previous recessions and the exploration of how brands work tells us that brands with strong equity outperform. So brands with strong equity outperform when demand bounces back. And there's some interesting work which looks at how strong brands perform when they come out of recession. And if you think about lockdown as a sort of similar to a recession in the sense that demand has been suffocated, brands need to bounce back when they come out the other end. And there's interesting analysis from Millward Brown on how their Brand Z portfolio of strong brands compares to the S&P 500. So what they've done is they've taken their strong brands as defined as having strong brand equity in the minds of consumers with the S&P 500, the stock index that measures the performance of 500 of the biggest companies in the US. And the data is interesting because it shows that recessions or times where demand is reduced, when it comes to the performance of brands, recessions can be pretty non-discriminating. So if you look at the green line, which is the Brand Z strong brand portfolio, versus the grey line, which is the overall S&P 500, the decline is pretty precipitous for both. So recession is hitting them both equally hard. However, if we go into the next chart and you look at the recovery phase, so we're looking specifically at the 2008 recession here. So you can see the precipitous decline during the 2008 recession. And then you got the bottom of that recession at the end of 2008, and then how it climbs out in 2009. You can see both S&P and the Brand Z strong portfolio brands increase, but the overperformance of the Brand Z strong portfolio brands is really significant here. So it shows that when it comes to recovery, it shows that when things open up and demand bounces back, the strong brands outperform. And this may be because when consumer confidence returns, consumers start to allow themselves to start spending again more on those desirable brands. So it's an important learning for brands who have lost demand during the lockdown, because they need to ensure they maintain equity to outperform when demand returns. So we think it's important that brands think of smart marketing initiatives to maintain that invisibility. So the challenge for brands is to therefore maintain that visibility during a time of invisibility, so they keep their brand equity strong and are better equipped to perform well when demand bounces back. So I'll hand over to Rick now, who will talk about brands that are doing this well, even where their core businesses have seized up.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, Steve. And I think, we'd also pose the question, what's more important in this phase? Is it the message or is it the messenger? And again, we were looking at some recent research where consumers were asked to think about communications from brands during this time, and who is it that they actually want to hear from. So this employees on the front line, was clearly the leader there with sort of 38%. Now, not every brand's got that ability to have people on sort of front line, as we see it in this battle, to kind of speak. But what everyone does have is a CEO and a founder. And I think it's really telling that the sort of leadership of brands and how we kind of judge brands comes so much from founders and having them visible. And that's from the consumer mindset, but we'd also implore this from an internal comms and employee engagement perspective as well. The businesses that have strong leadership now and are reassuring staff about they've got a plan. None of us know exactly what's going to happen next, and that's the whole purpose of this kind of webinar, to share some possible outcomes of what could happen. But I think we need to have strong leadership in terms of letting your staff and colleagues know that you're doing everything that you can within the constraints of the knowledge that you have, but also got a plan for sort of going forwards. And then consumers are wanting to kind of say, well, what is it that you're doing as a business? Are you treating people with, you know, in a human manner? Are you showing empathy? Are you putting people before profit, etc.? You know, are you doing good as a business beyond just trying to survive? And you know, we all know that every business has just got to try and survive in this period initially, but it's, you know, going beyond that. And then third there is third-party experts, and this has been a sort of a classic PR tactic since time began. Rather than you just telling your audience how good your product is, it's when you bring in that third-party expert to add further credibility. So, you know, for us and one of our clients, Silent Night, it might be the sleep doctor, Dr. Narina, who comes in and gives that third-party advice on how to get better night's sleep, and we'll touch more on that later on, rather than just the brand telling you itself. Often it can be nutritionists for food brands, or it can be dermatologists for skincare brands, or, you know, whoever it might be. And then influencers and celebrities kind of bringing up there in fourth and fifth a lower kind of percentage in terms of who they want to hear from, but obviously they still play a role out there in helping to kind of spread that message. So just thinking about who you're going out with the message, I think is critical there. And then brand's role here in terms of providing entertainment during this period. And I think this is a really nice example with the National Theatre. Obviously, theatres are closed, but actually making things available to watch online whilst they're closed. So world-class theatre, previously recorded and filmed shows and things. People are also doing some kind of, on smaller scale, live Zoom performances of different sort of theatre and things as well. So basically, it's just these guys helping to fulfill that need for people to still be entertained and still see some great quality entertainment, but obviously doing it safely at home. And then a lovely little tie-in here with Lego, and actually about recreating favourite scenes from a production and just creating that sort of user-generated content, involving your community, tie up with another family brand. I'm sure there's a lot of Lego sets being absolutely hammered up and down the nation at the moment. I'm standing on it every day when I get out of bed and finding it all over the house. So just a nice little simple brand tie-up as well there to kind of potentially involve more of the family in the piece there. As well. And then obviously we're looking here at sort of giving back to the community and what brands can actually do more and sort of support the communities that they're in. We just touched back on Leon here. So I think that the sort of 50% off for care workers, NHS and stuff is now kind of almost become slightly vanilla, but I'm not saying it's not the right thing to do, but it's, you know, everyone's doing it from, you know, ASOS or misguided fashion. It's kind of like support the NHS with discounts and stuff. That's great. But I think these guys are one of the first out there, free meals for kids and things as well. So helping people out in sort of in the tough times and the free delivery. So that it feels like they're doing as much as they can to kind of help people off rather than just a little bit of a discount code there. And I think providing this connection is so important as well. I think at this moment in time, mental health is a massive worry for lots of people. And I think that's one of the government concerns about how long we're in lockdown for, people feeling they're in isolation, etc. And I won't ask how Steve found this, but he found Tinder over the weekend update. Sorry, Steve, just on them sort of changing their offer at the moment and actually making a passport feature, which is normally an extra paid for item, making it free to everyone. And it just helps people actually connect with other cities and different locations. And it's about actually just chatting and sort of connecting with people in areas outside of where you live. And it's not necessarily about the finding love side of it. It's just about actually people who wanting to go off and meet people, being able to speak and find new people, new connections and souls to actually converse with and sort of fill up, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and just kind of feel part of something there. So I think that's nice. And then another brand here, Go Outdoors, rebranded as Go Indoors. So obviously it's one of the biggest outdoor retailers, and the outdoor market's clearly decimated at the moment. But what they're doing is throwing their weight behind the NHS message about staying in, stay at home, go camping in your garden. They're producing a whole lot of content, inspiring people to just do things in their house and at home. There's a nice sort of almost like a public information video advert, if you like, that driven, locally produced, which was really nice and went down well. And then they've actually found that there's this great British camp out. So a normal guy, a bathroom fitter from Nottingham, had started this movement, trying to raise 100 quid on Just Giving by getting people to camp out a couple of weekends back. And these guys have got behind him, supporting him, and giving him a bit of a platform. And it's raised sort of £200,000 now, and still sort of rising up there. So just kind of throwing your weight of your brand behind key messaging as well. I think it's a nice example. And then brands stepping up and offering guidance and expertise, is really important. And again, sort of another client of ours, Sart Night Beds, we mentioned before. They've closed the factory. They're not making any more mattresses at the minute. When retailers, etc., sell out of what they've got, those that are still delivering, that'll be it for now until they're back open. But the brand wants to maintain that visibility, as Steve was talking about, knowing the value of bouncing back quickly on the back of this. But also as a market leader, they feel that they should be out there doing something, and doing something isn't about trying to flog more mattresses necessarily, although their investors might not necessarily agree with that. But as the brand guardians, they know it's actually right to be doing the important thing, and that's trying to help the nation. And this is actually, again, helping people to get a good night's sleep. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of worries across the UK at the moment. You can see it across social media, radio phone-ins, etc. People having nightmares, kids having nightmares, people just unable to sleep for the worry of what's happening. So actually stepping in with their sleep doctor and giving advice and trying to just help people to kind of get through these kind of times is part of that role. And then those that can contribute to the national effort as well is vitally important. I think locally to us guys in Manchester, Gary Neville and his partners were very quick out the blocks to do this. So they closed their hotels, Hotel Football and the Stock Hotel that they own to the public. But rather than furloughing their staff, they've kept their employment and actually opened hotels up for free for NHS workers that needed to be separated and isolated from loved ones to stop the virus spreading. So that's a fantastic initiative there. And I think this is really nice, where some of the top designers and engineers in the world, are involved in areas outside of the NHS. It's a Formula One, Dyson, people like this, and they're putting their engineers to great use and sort of creating adaptive breathing devices, ventilators, etc., and making things available and making as many as they can to support the NHS. And I just think that's really sort of laudable use of sort of helping the effort through, a deep skill set. And again, it's just showing you don't have to be massive. You don't have to have deep pockets to do this. So, a couple of Burnley-based businesses here, and one of them is on the webinar today. So shout out to these guys, keeping going. So the Lancashire Textiles, instead of sewing up duvets, they just turned to making face masks instead. And the lack of PPE equipment into the NHS is shocking. And I think we're all fully in agreement with that. And it's really showing up the really poor quality NHS supply chain, when I know mates with utilities companies are still able to buy protective gear for guys fixing holes in roads tomorrow, but the nurses on the front line don't even have it. It's a real disgrace. And Cool Kit there, who produce, they buy vans and convert them into refrigerated vans that are vital to keep medicines at the right temperature and food at the right temperature. And these guys are battling on despite having no sort of supply chain. The van manufacturers are all closed. The parts people are closed. So again, putting their in-house guys to the test to see how they can make working vans out of the kind of resources and stocks they've got in there, so they can still deliver more vans to pharmaceutical businesses to get more drugs out to people. So well done, everyone there. And again, we touched on this before. As a brand, you've got to be thinking, you've got to have a human touch, and that's whether you're dealing with your internal audience, your internal stakeholders, but also showing that you've got empathy and you can you understand your target audience. And I think a classic example, there's a number here of people who've got it wrong recently, and I think Liverpool Football Club at least had the gumption to listen to their audience. They saw the feedback. They saw that the fans were up in arms about them furloughing the non-playing staff when they've got the multi-millionaire players squad. So they at least listened and reversed that decision. I think Wetherspoons is quite interesting because they've been a little bit of a consumer darling in the last few years, and sort of anti-establishment. But I think their boss has got this one wrong. But even Sir Richard Branson, who again has been a sort of someone that we always look up to as a PR master, got it so wrong with Virgin Airlines, and has faced a hell of a backlash in the media and across social media as well for asking his Virgin Atlantic staff to take 8 weeks unpaid leave and things. So just actually remembering the human side of it is just so important for brands. And I think just in terms of how do we build trust through this crisis and beyond, because trust is one of the key factors to whether people are going to come back to your brand or even switch over to your brand after this. And we touched on it with the research at the first slide, about half of consumers thinking if brands aren't communicating at all in this crisis, then they're not going to trust them. So making sure that you're supporting and protecting staff where relevant is so vital out there. You've got to be leading from the top with quality leadership and being honest and open about what you're trying to do, and seeing how you can help solve real world problems. And we've been through a number of examples of how we can do that. And then your comms is really about articulating and delivering these messages effectively. And this doesn't have to mean above the line TV advertising. This can be as simple as really fantastic emails out to your databases. It can be social posts. It can be, whether it's earned media pieces out there, however you're communicating to your audience. It's just getting that tone right and just showing that the human sort of touch out there. Edelman, who are one of the world's largest PR agencies, do their annual Trust Barometer report, which has just come out I think it was Jan or Feb, just ahead of this. But then they've dipped back into the research to look at the impact of coronavirus in terms of attitudes to brands and businesses and things. And you'll see at the bottom there that almost 2/3 believe that how brands respond now is going to have a huge impact on their likelihood to buy these brands' products again. So just being seen to have done the right things, to have been safe, to be looking after your employees as much as possible, to be looking after your supply chain, is really, really important. So I'll hand back over to Steve to go into section 3.
Thank you, Rick. So we talked about the first 2 phases, which are about the tactical response to the stay-at-home economy, the importance of adapting quickly through getting into emergency NPD mode and adapting product, service and delivery. And then we just talked about getting communications right and the relevance of communication, both for businesses and brands that are flying because demand is high. And that's about legitimizing making profits and showing that you're giving something back in a constructive, responsible way. But it's also relevant for those brands who aren't as well fitted to the stay-at-home economy. And here, communications is playing a role of maintaining visibility during a period of invisibility. And Rick has just shown some, I think, great examples of brands that have done that in really great imaginative ways. So the next 2 stages are about moving to a more proactive, strategic way of thinking. Many businesses will currently be in crisis mode, dealing with the extraordinary circumstances of lockdown. However, the smart businesses will be taking time to really start thinking about the next step, the medium term and the long term, and being proactive around creating success post lockdown. And the first part of this is adjusting brand strategy. And the reason why this is important is because lockdown will have forced a huge amount of behavior change. And, I think everybody has seen their own behavior and attitudes start to shift a bit during this period. And the media has talked a lot about new emerging behaviors and attitudes. You can see, people are scratch cooking more as they start to nest and enjoy that nesting instinct. I hear that apparently bread flour is pretty difficult to get hold of at the moment. And the banana bread is ubiquitous in many households. Working from home has been forced upon lots of people, and people have started to adapt to that and some of the barriers and fears around video conferencing and technology has started to decline. People are relying more on the local economy in terms of small local shops. Government institutions, which before all of this were viewed as being out of step, anachronistic, and unable to rise to the challenges of modern society, has now reinvented itself. And I think people are starting to appreciate the role that government plays in the world and its requirements. Key workers are now a thing, and people are starting to appreciate delivery people, which never happened before. Everyone seems to be running. I don't know about what it's like where you live. Everyone's turned into a runner. Seems their exercise has changed in some way. Community, I'm on my community WhatsApp group for the first time. I've not been on it before. All of a sudden, small mini communities are seen to be jumping up. People are getting outside on Thursdays at 8 o'clock and clapping for carers. There's a rising community spirit. So we're seeing lots of different sorts of behaviours emerging and lots of different attitudes. Now, some of these will be temporary, and as soon as lockdown ends, we'll see old habits reassert themselves. However, some behaviour changes will become more embedded as people recognise new and different benefits of different ways of living and behaving, and this kind of forced experimentation of doing things differently through lockdown will start to change behaviour. It's through trying things and adopting new behaviours that long-term behaviour changes occur. So we will see some behaviour change. So the challenge for brands will be in figuring out what will change for good and what will return to equilibrium. And that's no mean feat. And it's about thinking those things through and working that out. And this is where marketing, again, will be crucial. Marketing in its sensitive use of research, understanding consumers, understanding markets, understanding brands should lead the way, really, in working out how long-term brand strategy should evolve and adapt for how the world would change post-lockdown. And some key questions to ask are on this chart. You know, does your target audience need to change? Rick talked a bit about Zoom and how almost serendipitously its target audience now is no longer just businesses. It's a mass market consumer brand. That target audience has changed massively. Will your target audience's attitudes and behaviours have changed? Well, we just talked about some new behaviours and changing attitudes. The challenge will be working out which of those will survive and persevere beyond the lockdown. Do you need new products to compete? Given the above, given shifts in target audience, given shifts in attitudes and behaviour, does your business need new products to compete? If so, those work streams need to be put in place now. With more and more experimentation with online delivery of products and services that people have transacted in more physical ways previously, will that change distribution mechanisms? Will there be an increasing reliance on remote and online distribution mechanisms? Given the above, will new pricing strategies be required? And more broadly, do brands need to reposition a bit and to shift, given how markets are changing and how attitudes and behaviours are changing? And marketers will also need to review whether the mechanics for building mental availability need to change as well, given changes in target audiences and distribution mechanics. So the question there is, how will the crisis impact on strategy fundamentals? And businesses and brands need to start taking time out now in order to foresee that and to look ahead. Which takes us then onto our fourth and final module. Once you've got your brand strategy right, you need to think about the broader economic context in which your brand and business is going to be operating in. And as I said earlier, the consensus amongst global economists is that we are about to enter a pretty severe, potentially long-lasting recession coming out of lockdown. So it's safe to predict that a recession is coming our way. So of all the certainties, all the uncertainties facing us, this does feel pretty certain. Last Thursday, the IMF predicted that we're heading into the worst economic crisis since the 1930s recession. Some more optimistically, Martin Solar suggested that we'll bounce back quickly. However, I think we can presume that we will go into recession. It's going to take some time to come out. Although we can't predict the precise dynamics of this recession in terms of depth of duration, we can draw on experiences of how marketing can influence success during recession by looking at past recessions. Now, I won't go into this in depth, but a good report to look at if you haven't looked at it before is the IPA's Advertising in a Downturn. It's an excellent interrogation of how ad spend affects performance based on historical data. It documents how multiple examples of how brands that continue to invest in marketing tend to outperform their competitors. Now, the previous data I showed you from Brand Z shows how strong brands outperform weak brands when you come out of recession. So that's another reason for investing in brand during recession. The data here shows how brands that spend during a recession also outperform their competitors. So the broad advice, really, based on previous recessions, is that the advice has to be to continue investing in marketing. And perhaps this overperformance of those brands that do invest in marketing during a recession is explained by the principle of excess share of voice. Now, for those of you who haven't come across that term before, excess share of voice is the principle that if your share of voice for your brand, if your share of voice or media exposure within a category is greater than your share of market, then you grow your market share. Now, Binet and Field, in their well-established analyses of past IPA effectiveness case studies, have explored this relationship with rigor. And here's this chart shows some of their publications, and it's based on an analysis of around about 1,000 IPA case studies over 30 years. And it is perhaps the most robust battery of research and data that looks at the correlation between marketing behavior and effect. It covers around 700 brands and 83 categories, and they've looked at this relationship between share of media voice and share of market. And what they discovered through their analysis of all those case studies was that there is a predictable relationship at play here, and it's a very useful one for marketeers to fall back on in order to judge how much they should be investing in marketing. And what they found was that for every 10 points that your share of voice exceeds your market share or your share of market, your market share increases by 0.5%. And that's really significant. A 0.5% increase in market share in most categories represents a massive amount of revenue. So why is this particularly pertinent now? Well, this is particularly pertinent now because in a recession, brands can achieve an increased share of voice simply by holding their existing spend levels. Now, as discussed, if we accept that we are likely to move into a recession, we can assume that brands will cut their spend in a recession. Historically, in recessions, brands cut their spend, so the overall amount of spend on marketing and share of voice decreases. So for brands that don't cut to their spend levels, they increase their share of voice. Mathematically, that's what happens. And if they increase their share of voice, they increase their market share. So for smart brands, this excess share of voice becomes easier to achieve simply because everybody else spends less. So the next chart is a simple thought experiment that plays this through with some actual numbers. So imagine as a brand, you spend $1 million in marketing in getting your share of voice, and that buys you around 10% of share of voice, whether that's through PR or buying paid for media. Now, imagine that total market spend, because there's a recession, decreases by 50%. Mathematically, without doing anything, just by holding your £1 million investment, your share of voice now increases to 20%. So that's a 10-point increase in market share. And if you go back to Binet and Field's findings, what this means is that your market share will increase by 0.5%. And that's through doing nothing. It's simply by holding your nerve and holding your spend levels as they are. So that thought experiment, it may seem dramatic in terms of the numbers used, in terms of a 50% reduction in marketing spend, but the reality is that we're dealing with those sorts of figures right now in lockdown. Campaign released on Thursday, I think it was last week, that best sources suggest that the UK ad market faces a drop of 50% in April. So we're dealing with those sorts of figures now. So for those brands that are holding their nerve in times of recession, already they'll be getting huge increases in share of voice exposure, which will translate into market share gains. However, it's not just about what you spend, it's also about how you spend it. Now, one of the key aspects of Binet and Field's work is understanding the symbiotic importance of long-term brand building and short-term conversion activity working hand in hand. One of their central contentions is that effective investments in marketing focus on covering off two pillars. One, long-term brand building, and two, more short-term activation or conversion activity. Now, long-term brand building is about targeting not only customers who are in the market now, but potential future customers and priming them for when they come into the market. And the sorts of activity which is most appropriate for that sort of, for those sorts of tasks are memory forming, desire building activity which captures the public's imagination. And that's really important because it primes future customers and it works across the long term. And then you've got shorter term tasks which are aimed primarily at people who are in the market now, and they're designed in order to convert people and nudge people to buy your product and buy it now. And for that sort of communications, it's more rational persuasion triggers, often with promotional tactics, capturing the attention of people who are in the market ready to buy. And Binet and Field talk about the fact that both of these tasks need to be in play for brands in order to create success. Brands need to plan on both of those planes, the long term and the short term. Now, the problem is that during a recession, the other point to make on that is Binet and Field, through their analysis, also go a step further and look at effective case studies and suggest that there is an optimum balance between these two different tasks in terms of investment. And that's a ratio of 60% of your budget going into the long-term brand building and 40% going into the short-term activation. And so that's the optimum blend that they observe generally and averagely in order to create success. Now, the problem is that during a recession, brands tend to focus more on fighting the price war. During a recession, brands become more short-term and more fearful about their market share today. And so the ratio tends to shift more to short-term conversion building activity rather than brand building. And Binet and Field talk about this and look at this effect, this I guess, behavioral bias to focusing on the short term during recession amongst the brands that they've looked at since 2008. So I'm going to show you now 3 charts which have come out of their analysis of campaigns since 2008, the recession there, and they all show very consistent trends. The first chart illustrates the rise of short-termism since 2008. The 2008 recession. If you look at the vertical axis, it shows the percentage of campaigns that were short term. And if you look at 2008 onwards, you can see the sharp rise. Now the following chart tells a similar story. It looked at the drift towards more activation and conversion spend. So here now on the vertical axis, we've got percentage of budgets allocated to brand building, and you can see from 2008 onwards that going down. So what they're showing is that the 2008 recession is precipitating a more short-term activation mindset, but that's then continuing beyond the period of the recession and is becoming embedded as a sort of long-term behavior. And the third and final chart on this shows how there's a very worrying trend that on the vertical axis now we've got the average number of very large business effects reported, and you can see that from 2008 there's a declining effectiveness of all IPA campaigns. The average number of very large business effects reported is going down. So taken together, we can see that these charts show a very worrying trend. Recessions encouraging short-term thinking, brands and businesses focusing much more on activation rather than long term, and then this translating into less effective campaigns. So that's it. They're the four simple steps. Firstly, adapt your product and delivery mechanism and operations to survive and thrive during lockdown. Secondly, get your communications and marketing right, and that's relevant for both brands that are flying and need to justify profit making, as well as those brands who aren't flying, whose business has gone into stasis, but still need to maintain visibility. And then thirdly, marketers and businesses need to understand which attitudes and behaviors are likely to change after lockdown and start to adjust their brand strategies for long-term success. And then finally, as I said, the consensus is we are going to move into recession. So let's start thinking about how we need to behave in a recession. And history tells us that brands cut back marketing in a recession. However, history also shows us that this is not the wise thing to do, that the smart move is to capitalize on the fact that everybody else is cutting back and you can increase your share of voice and increase your market share. And finally, it's not just about holding your share of voice in order to increase market share. It's about making sure that you are resisting the temptation to become increasingly short-term in your thinking and maintain investment in building brand and brand desirability, and that will create success. So that's it. That's our four-stage process or step approach to creating some sort of sense of control and success during these extraordinary times. So finally, on behalf of both me and Rick, we'd like to wish you good luck, and let's all embrace the spirit of helping each other where we can. These are extraordinary times, and they're times where business and brands should put aside their differences, use their special skills and abilities, and share and help each other as much as possible so that we can all survive this difficult period and hopefully thrive when we get to the other side.
Thanks, Steve. So hopefully we've shown there practical examples of brands doing things right and wrong, as well as the strategic framework as outlined by Steve. I'm just going to jump into any Q&As or chats now and sort of run through those to hopefully answer questions for you. Looks like we've got quite a few, so just bear with us as we try and work through this. So Andy Green, challenge death of the high street scenario in post-corona world, possible resurgence of social capital and local sense of identity. Great case study. So I think Steve just legged it, I think, to chuck one of his kids out of the room or something. I think Andy was more as an observation there rather than
trapped in the room. I just ejected the dog from the room, which
good dog. Well done.
You into wine in the background, which is a little bit to say.
I think Andy was making an observation rather than asking a specific question, and very much around will we see a resurgence of sort of local and social capital on the high street. I think that's one of the interesting things that Steve was pointing out, which trends are here to stay, because we're benefiting from a local butcher, a local farm shop, all doing deliveries and things to us. Will they carry on doing that? Will it be worth their while, or is everyone just going to go back to the big supermarkets and things? So I guess time will tell on that one. Someone's asked, considering brand tie-ups to benefit from our suppliers' own mailing list, considering what sort of advisory services we could provide to our customer base, both spring to mind as urgent tasks. Focusing more on products for home deliveries is high on my agenda, given the likelihood of home working and therefore consumption at home being on the increase. Given that a huge new consumer base will recently have sampled home delivered goods for the first time, I'll be thinking about the concept of mental availability too. Okay, so that's someone just sharing some of the things we've triggered in the talk. And then I just think jump into the Q&A. There's a couple of questions in here. Really interesting about people trusting a brand less if there's no communication. What about if the sector you're outreaching about is suffering a lot, i.e. travel, battling brand reputation, trying not to come across cold-heartedly, as Steve said, not to exploit a situation, but having something to say, how to avoid media comments without coming across as vultures. I think that's a balancing act, isn't it? If you're related to the travel sector, you can still show human empathy and still understand the human condition and the situation that we're all kind of in. I think it's just making sure that you're relevant, and I think the tone of voice is really important there. Steve, is there anything else you'd add to
that? Yeah, I think as per the presentation, really, that I think if your sector is suffering, there is opportunities to maintain that visibility, and that's still really important. But you have to do it in a way which doesn't look as though you are simply trying to capitalize on the situation. So it has to be done with a lightness of touch, and good judgment is required in each of those situations. And again, that's where I think marketing is critical. It's the empathetic part of the organization which is paid to make those sorts of judgments. So it's about figuring out the relevance of your brand during this period, even if its products and services aren't selling, and what it can legitimately say with credibility without it looking opportunistic. And I believe every brand has something to say and has a point of view which people will appreciate and respect. It's just about mining that and figuring out what it is.
Yeah, great. Paul at Media Performance asks, what's the source of this chart? It's a really interesting chart to show our client CEOs, but he posted that earlier, so I'm not sure which chart that was, Paul, but what we'll do is at the end of the presentation, we'll put a link to all the different research that we looked at. So the IPA stuff, the opinion stuff, the census-wide stuff, the Edelman Trust Barometer, all those different things. Obviously, some of the stuff that's just pulled from online media is self-evident, the Times and things like that are in there. But anything that's kind of a research-based piece that we've Steve and I kind of mined, then we'll put links in there so you can find those. And if it's still not clear, just drop me a note directly, Paul, and we'll sort that out. Andy Green, great presentation, case studies, valuable insights. Smoking Gun and Planet Express is a good example of collaborative working. What other partnerships can you envisage people working in? I mean, we like the Morrisons and Deliveroo one, didn't we, Steve, that you pulled out for this as well. But
yeah, I think there's some really interesting ones. Seeing Google and Android coming together as well, and trying to work out tracing technology. And there was a great collective advert created by the supermarket grocers, which I think is right at the back end of this presentation, actually, as a reference, showing brands that are normally in stark competition with each other, putting aside their differences in order to solve problems. And I think that's something that we see as a sort of tactical response to the crisis. Probably not something that will endure more long term, but is a great example of seeing the community coming together.
Right. There's a good one here from Sarah. I think one for you, Steve. Would you be advising channel mix changes as well, as we've all increased our time on social? Would these social digital platforms remain more important post-lockdown, or is visibility still best achieved by a good channel mix? Your dog's answering that one.
I think the answer to that will be just going back to that sort of step 3 in our simple 4-step approach will be really reassessing the overall brand strategy, looking at who the target audiences are, how the product and services are switching, how the distribution channel mix is switching, and then once you've answered those questions, working out the most appropriate media channel or the most appropriate channel mix in order to maintain and build mental availability and connection with the audience. So I'm dodging that question by not answering specifically, but saying that there's a requirement for all brands to step back, relook at their strategies in the light of how things are changing, and to get that mix right and to adjust that mix to make it optimal. And
I think part of the answer is we don't know on that, because I think the likes of, speaking to media buying colleagues, the likes of ITV, Sky, Channel 4, etc., are all really pushing hard on their digital advertising platforms at the minute, because people aren't wanting to commit to sort of the big TV spend pieces. But yeah, ITV's just had a record share of voice. So in terms of reach out there at the minute, TV is absolutely huge in terms of volumes and numbers, but people don't want to put the spend behind it. So back to Steve's point about being brave and actually getting extra share of voice. If you've got the money and the kahunas to go out there and get that extra share of voice at the minute, the opportunities is kind of there for people. But I also think that this crisis is going to have precipitated more people going to video on demand in terms of older generations. So, probably like my parents' generation and such like, who would never have thought of going onto iPlayer and sort of all the others out there at the minute. But I've started to look online for extra sort of TV things to watch. It's changed some of their media consumption in terms of traditional TV viewing and things. But also newspapers are struggling. People aren't going out to the shops as much. People aren't buying as many print newspapers. Yet online news readership is absolutely going through the roof. But we know that makes the publishers very little money. They still need to sell actual papers and get the advertising in through that. So there's a worry about how robust the British democratic media and particularly print and newspapers is going to be beyond this, and whether we'll see a drop off in newspaper titles on the back of this as well is a bit of a concern for us as well. And then I think the final question we've got in there is from Cindy, and Steve, it's probably a good one for you to kick off. Do we think that partnership marketing will be a big opportunity going forward?
Partnership marketing. I think during the lockdown phase, where brands are having to be inventive in order to adapt their products and services and the way that they respond to increased demand and the way that they respond to reduced workforces, partnerships have become really important in solving problems which brands and businesses can't solve on their own. Once we come out of this and we move to the other side and brands readapt, I don't know whether partnership marketing will become any more or more significant within the way that brands are trying to solve problems. Maybe businesses and brands that have been forced to enter into partnerships they wouldn't have thought about previously because of the lockdown, and have seen some success through doing that. Maybe if that has occurred and brands have seen and have had their eyes opened in a positive way to the potential of that, maybe we'll see some of those behaviours carry over. But I'm not sure. Personally, I believe that some of the great partnerships that we talked about in this presentation are more confined to responding to the lockdown, rather than they will become more long-term embedded behaviours. But who knows? We'll see.
Cheers, Steve. There's a couple more just dropped in. So one from Jade here. Do you have any advice for efficient monitoring of news cycles to help PRs turn around reactive newsjacking? So I think this falls to me, Steve. So great question, Jade. And I think the reactive newsjacking is something that my team's still on with a lot, but it's also it's getting harder at the minute, and it's getting harder for a number of reasons. Those that read Prolific North and Prolific London and things like that will have seen Reach, the publisher who own a plethora of regional titles, but also the Daily Mirror, the Express, the Star, and things like that. They've just furloughed up 20% of journalists. I've been doing this job 20 years, and I'd say there's about 20% of the amount of staff journos as there was when I started already. So all these publications have got fewer and fewer and fewer writers actually working in there. They're taking more and more from PA and from kind of news wires. And to get a story out on those wires, it's got to be really strong. It's got to be less fluff and things. So there's ways of working with those kind of the news wires to get your story out there. And it's also finding what's the coronavirus hook, because whether it's uplifting positive news. So this story's gone everywhere in the last couple of days about this beautiful 99-year-old man who's trying to do 100 lengths of his garden, and he's raised £3.5 million. There's the Great British Camp Out that we talked about before for the Go Outdoors got involved with, just a bathroom fitter from Nottingham who's trying to raise £100, and he's raised a couple £100 now. So those phenomenal sort of human interest stories still, and always will do, the sort of media gold dust, but it's how do you align that to a brand credibly is kind of really important. But I think back to consumers wanting to hear from CEOs and leaders, well, so do the media. The media want to hear from leaders who've got an opinion, and it's got to be adding to the story. It's not just cementing facts and figures that are already out there. What new take on the situation have you got, on what new initiatives are you planning and things? And some of that ties right back into Steve's process about adapting your brand strategy and what you're doing, and therefore making news out of that. So that's not an easy news jack to do, because that's going to relate to the business making some changes. But I think in terms of monitoring the news cycle, I don't think that's changed in terms of how to monitor in the crisis. You're still looking at, what's trending on Twitter today makes news tomorrow. What's making news now can start a trend on Twitter. It's looking at your Radio 4 today, your 5 Live, your BBC Breakfast, all those kind of big flagship BBC programmes are setting the news agenda for the day for people to kind of follow as well. So I think it's the usual sources in terms of news cycles. Okay, and then this is the last one, I think, in there. Another one from Sarah. Steve, I'll pass this to you. Do you think silver servers have grown and therefore older consumers are more relevant to online brands?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think it comes back to this question around making judgments around which behaviours are going to rebound back to the equilibrium before the lockdown and which new behaviours are going to perpetuate going forward. And it's fascinating because behavioural economists will tell you that in order to create behaviour change, you need to start behaving it first. Long-term behaviour change is most likely to occur if people start adopting the behaviours, and then they're more likely to continue them, rather than people saying they will do something or understanding the benefits of doing something. So behaviour begets behaviour, if you like. And the amazing thing about this period is that it's forced people to experiment with different ways of doing things because they've had to. They've been forced into adopting new behaviours. And so we will see lots of more long-term behaviours coming out of this. And it's been well documented in media how families have bought iPads and devices for older members of the family so that they can be connected and to log in. And I think we will see older people be much more comfortable and au fait with technology, applications, software, different ways of using it. And I think that's one thing that will spill over, that we'll see a much more sophisticated, online, empowered older cohort, post 65s, post 70s, using online.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. Well, I think we've got to the end of everyone's questions there. We've run over quite a bit on our planned time, but I think hopefully people have got some value out of that. There's been some kind comments in there, which I'll share with you as well, Steve, afterwards. So thank you very much for your time, Steve, in terms of preparing and planning some excellent insight and hopefully really simple and clear to follow strategic process. Thank you, everybody who's joined us and given up their time this morning. We hope it's been thought-provoking and useful, in terms of thinking about what you can do differently, step change. We will follow up with the recording and share the list of resources as promised. And of course, Steve and I are more than happy to answer any further questions that either you didn't want to ask in front of the whole sort of community, if you like, or are just quite sensitive. You've obviously all got our contacts from being invited to this in the first place. And who knows, we might do a follow-up on this in a couple of weeks, depending on sort of how things are sort of panning out and based on any feedback from you guys. So thanks again for joining, and hopefully see you on the other side face to face before too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers, Steve.
Goodbye.